Hey guys, tonight we drift back several thousand years to a place where rivers decide the rhythm of life and stories are pressed not on screens or even on paper, but into clay pulled straight from the earth itself. You're standing somewhere between the Tigris and the Euphrates in a stretch of land that ancient people called Sumer, though later travelers would name it Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. The air is heavy, the scent of damp soil and river reeds clinging to your skin. Somewhere nearby, a herd of goats bleats softly, and beyond them, a cluster of flickering oil lamps glows through open doorways. You can almost hear the hum of a city alive long before the word history even existed. Markets winding down, pottery being stacked, and in one quiet corner, a lone scribe rolling a small lump of clay between his palms. He's preparing to trap words, maybe a prayer or a king's command, into something more durable than memory. You, of course, probably wouldn't survive a single summer here. No air conditioning, no Wi-Fi, and the mosquitoes are roughly the size of small grapes. But that's all right. Tonight, you're just visiting. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from somewhere across the world, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I always love seeing how far these sleepy stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk slowly toward the banks of the river. It's night, but the land is not silent. Somewhere in the distance, someone's singing. A soft, repetitive melody meant to soothe restless animals or restless minds. The river catches glints of moonlight, and the mud along its edges gleams like bronze. That mud, you realize, is the secret to everything. In Mesopotamia, it is both burden and blessing. It floods homes and feeds fields. It traps footprints and preserves empires. Here, people depend on the river's gifts. The land gives them barley and dates, reeds for roofs, and thick clay for building. But it also gives them something even stranger, something invisible until someone decides to carve meaning into it. The first time a human presses a stick into wet clay to represent a thought, history begins. Not the loud, triumphant kind of history carved on stone monuments, but the quiet kind, the bedtime story kind. The sort that survives because someone took the time to press it down before the memory slipped away. You picture a young apprentice learning the craft. His teacher, a bearded man with tired eyes and a tablet streaked with dried clay, guides his hand as he practices the marks. The stylus leaves crisp, tiny wedges, all aligned in neat rows. The boy frowns. His lines are crooked. The teacher sighs, shakes his head, and says something about precision. After all, one misplaced wedge could turn offering of sheep into offering of shepherd. That's a pretty awkward typo. Historians still argue whether writing was born out of necessity or imagination, whether it came from counting sacks of grain or from the first impulse to tell a story. Maybe both. Maybe someone was bored one afternoon after tallying barley shipments and decided to record a myth for fun. Whatever the case, it worked. Mesopotamia's clay became the first notepad, the first diary, the first library shelf. You wander further into the city, where narrow streets twist between mud brick houses. The walls are cool to the touch, the air thick with the smell of cooked lentils and smoke. On a flat rooftop, a family lies under the stars, whispering about omens and dreams. It's hard not to feel a little envious. Their world moves at the pace of wind and water, not notifications and deadlines. Down below, a temple looms, a ziggurat, its stepped sides catching moonlight. At its base, a priest hurries past carrying a basket of small clay tablets. Inside, he'll set them near the altar, each one covered in writing, prayers, inventories, lists of offerings. They look simple, almost crude, But those tablets are seeds of civilization. They're the reason you can even imagine this moment now. The clay squishes beneath your feet as you approach a kiln. It's still warm from a day's work, faintly glowing in the dark. Inside, a few tablets are baking, hardening into permanence. The irony isn't lost on you. These people are using fire, the very thing that destroys, to preserve. One careless blaze could level a city, but a controlled flame here could immortalize its thoughts. You glance at one of the unfired tablets, just lying nearby. The marks are fresh, the wedges deep and careful. You can't read them yet, but maybe it's a letter from a merchant to his brother, complaining about rising barley prices. Maybe it's a lullaby written down for the first time, something about a mother, a moon, and a child too curious for bedtime. Or maybe it's a curse on whoever stole someone's goat. There's always at least one goat thief in every civilization. A soft wind passes through the palm trees, carrying with it a mix of sounds: the splash of oars, the murmur of night traders, the creak of ropes as boats are tied along the shore. It's mesmerizing, this hum of early humanity. And through it all, you sense an undercurrent of intention. These people aren't just living, they're documenting. Every stroke of the stylus says, "We were here." One particularly intriguing fact: some of these tablets are so old that when archaeologists discovered them thousands of years later, they were still legible, perfectly preserved because the cities that burned in conquest accidentally fired their libraries solid. Flames meant to destroy ended up protecting words. The universe does have a twisted sense of humor sometimes. And here's your quirky tidbit for the night. Ancient scribes occasionally recycled their tablets. They'd soak them in water to erase what was written and start fresh, like an early form of a reusable notebook. Imagine someone today deleting an entire essay by dunking their laptop in a bucket. Effective, sure, but not exactly recommended. The moon climbs higher. You wander past sleeping dogs, over doorsteps smoothed by countless feet. Somewhere, a child stirs in his sleep. Maybe he dreams of becoming a scribe one day, or maybe he dreams of something simpler: a full bowl of grain, a longer flood, a cooler night, collective memory that will one day travel far beyond this city's walls. You pause by the river again. The water glistens, moving lazily under the stars. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the murmur of those stories beneath the surface. Lines of cuneiform drifting like reeds, carrying fragments of names, poems, and taxes downstream. You reach down, scoop a handful of cool mud, and let it slip between your fingers. It feels ordinary, but now you know. This is the substance that outlasts dynasties. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a future archaeologist will brush the sand off a tablet you might have walked past tonight. They'll squint under artificial light and whisper the first sound from it in thousands of years. And for a moment, your world and theirs will touch, linked by the strange persistence of clay. As the night deepens, the oil lamps fade one by one, leaving only the shimmer of the rivers and the faint, rhythmic scratching of a stylus in the dark. It's the sound of humanity learning how to remember. You wake again in the dim glow of early dawn, when the first slant of sun turns the horizon gold and the air smells faintly of wet earth. A soft wind moves through the reeds, and for a moment you just stand there, watching the river glide past as if time itself were caught in its current. The streets of the city are still sleepy. Only a few figures stir. Bakers lighting fires, herders calling to their animals, and a pair of scribes lugging baskets heavy with clay. They trudge down toward the riverbank, sandals squelching in the mud, searching for just the right kind of earth. You follow them, half curious, half entranced by the rhythm of their work. They squat low, their hands sinking into the muck, and start kneading the river's gift into shape. You can almost feel it yourself, The cool, pliable weight of the clay, sticky but satisfying, like the Mesopotamian version of Play-Doh. Except here, this simple material is the foundation of civilization. You realize something strange. In this world, mud is memory. Every story, every law, every prayer begins as a lump of earth. People here have learned that the very thing they walk on can hold words longer than any spoken breath. They scoop, mix, and mold, adding straw for strength or sand for smoothness. Sometimes they'll dry the clay in the shade until it's just firm enough to handle. Then comes the stylus, a reed cut at an angle, perfectly shaped for pressing neat, wedge-like marks. The scribes hold it between their fingers as delicately as a modern writer might hold a fountain pen. The process looks humble, but it's revolutionary. Without this muddy miracle, humanity might never have learned to think in the long term. You wouldn't have libraries, contracts, or bedtime stories at all. Just gossip passed around the fire until it faded into smoke. Historians still argue whether this innovation was purely practical, born from the need to track grain and taxes, or something more poetic, an early attempt to cheat mortality by preserving memory. You lean toward the poetic explanation, because, let's be honest, nobody falls asleep dreaming about inventory lists. Still, it's probably a mix of both. Necessity with a hint of vanity. Humanity's favorite combination. As you watch, one of the scribes picks up a half-formed tablet and smooths its surface with the side of his hand. He's careful, methodical, almost meditative. Each motion feels like a ritual. He's not just preparing a writing surface, he's setting the stage for words that might last longer than his own bones. In this moment, the line between craft and devotion blurs. When he's done, he lifts the tablet toward the sunlight, checking for cracks. Then he sets it aside to dry a little more. Around him, a dozen other slabs are arranged on woven mats, their surfaces glinting faintly in the rising light. To a casual observer, it might look like they're making roof tiles or plates. But you know better. This is where thought becomes tangible. Here's a fun little tidbit for you. Some Mesopotamian scribes actually left fingerprints or even nail marks in their tablets, unintentionally signing their work with traces of themselves. Thousands of years later, archaeologists can still spot those human impressions, the literal touch of a writer long gone. It's strangely comforting, isn't it? The idea that someone's clumsy thumbprint might outlast entire empires. You take a few steps closer, trying not to disturb the drying tablets. The smell of wet clay mingles with smoke from the city's hearths. Somewhere nearby, a potter's wheel hums, the sound blending with the low coo of pigeons roosting on rooftops. This whole civilization hums with rhythm, the rhythm of creation, of shaping something lasting out of what's ordinary. You imagine what it must feel like to be a scribe here, to wake each morning knowing that your job is to make words solid, not just to say things, but to anchor them. Every wedge you press carries weight. If you write the wrong number, a merchant loses money. If you miswrite a name, a god might be offended. And yet, when you get it right, when the marks align perfectly, it's like magic. The clay becomes an extension of your mind. The scribes eventually gather their tools and start the slow walk back toward the city, balancing their fresh tablets on flat wooden trays. You follow at a careful distance. The path winds through fields of barley and date palms, where farmers are already at work. Their shouts echo faintly in the morning haze. This is what civilization looks like in its earliest heartbeat: sweat, mud, sunlight, and faith in the power of permanence. As you re-enter the city, you pass walls decorated with carvings of lions and kings. The contrast hits you: grand, fierce imagery in stone, and soft, unassuming slabs of clay tucked away in storerooms. One survives through strength, the other through subtlety. Yet over time, it's the clay, not the stone, that carries the most precious cargo. The kings fade, the stories stay. You stop near a shaded courtyard where apprentices are busy drying yesterday's tablets. Some are large and rectangular, others small enough to fit in a palm. Each one has lines of tiny wedge-shaped impressions marching neatly across its face. They glint in the sun like coded messages, unreadable but beautiful. One of the boys waves his stylus proudly and tells you, "This one's an order for fish oil." He says it with the enthusiasm of a poet announcing his latest masterpiece. You nod approvingly. Who are you to judge the first accountants of history? Every so often, a tablet will crack as it dries. When that happens, the apprentices sigh, crumble it back into dust, and start over. The fragility of it feels symbolic somehow. How easy it is to lose knowledge, and how determined humanity has always been to write again. By midday, the sun is fierce, the kind that makes you grateful you're only an observer in this dreamscape. The scribes retreat indoors, carrying their drying tablets into cooler chambers. Some will leave them in shade to harden naturally. Others will stack them near kilns for baking. Once fired, the clay transforms. It's no longer soft or temporary. It becomes stone-like, capable of surviving centuries of rain, fire, or even conquest. One tablet, one thought, one moment in time, preserved by the simplest of materials. There's a kind of cosmic irony in that. Out of all the inventions humanity would ever create, the first hard drive is literally hard. No wires, no batteries, just clay, patience, and sunlight. And yet, it's this basic technology that carries the earliest known stories, the earliest known laws, and even the earliest known jokes. Yes, there are ancient Mesopotamian jokes, and they're as awkwardly dry as you'd expect. You run your fingers gently along the edge of a half-finished tablet. It's still damp, and your touch leaves a faint mark. Somewhere in a museum, a curator would faint at the thought. But right now it feels intimate, like shaking hands with time. You imagine the stories locked inside, waiting to be baked into eternity. As the afternoon wanes, shadows grow long across the courtyard. The air smells of baked clay and cooling fires. You can almost hear the whisper of future centuries sliding by. The rise of Akkad, Babylon, Assyria, each inheriting this same craft, this same trust in mud to hold meaning. The scribes don't know it, but they've just made the human mind portable. And maybe that's what makes this scene so quietly powerful. Everything begins here, in the hands of people who looked at the ground beneath their feet and thought, yes, this will do. The same earth that grew their crops, that built their homes, now holds their stories. You take one last look at the tablets drying in the fading sun. Tomorrow, they'll carry commands, contracts, myths, or lullabies. Tomorrow, someone might make a new one. Tomorrow, another apprentice will press his stylus and leave a tiny wedge that will survive until a modern archaeologist brushes it off thousands of years later, squinting to read what someone once whispered into clay. And as night falls again over the city, the river hums its slow, patient song. The same tune it's been singing since before words had shape. The morning heat rises quickly over the rooftops, turning the air into something you could almost chew. The city is alive again, donkeys braying, traders calling out prices, the scent of baked bread drifting between alleys. You weave through the crowd until you find yourself in a quiet courtyard tucked behind the temple walls. Here, away from the bustle, the scribes begin their work. You watch as they sit cross-legged around low tables, each with a tablet resting on a wooden board. The atmosphere feels more like a meditation hall than an office. Nobody rushes. The only sounds are the faint tapping of styluses against clay and the occasional sigh when someone has to smooth over a mistake. You settle nearby, careful not to cast a shadow over their work. The head scribe, a man with lines around his eyes and a patch of dried clay on his tunic, glances up and gives you a knowing smile. He's seen hundreds of apprentices before, and you fit the type. Curious, slightly overwhelmed, trying to pretend you understand how these rows of tiny wedges could possibly form meaning. He picks up his stylus, a slim reed cut into a sharp wedge at the tip. The secret, he says, almost conspiratorially, is in the angle. You lean closer. With practiced ease, he presses the stylus into the soft clay, not writing exactly, but sculpting thought. Each impression is deliberate, some vertical, some diagonal, some crossing just slightly. He's not dragging or drawing, he's pressing and releasing, letting geometry turn into language. It's mesmerizing to watch. You realize you're witnessing the world's first data entry specialists, but far more elegant. Every tablet is a small universe of order. Each wedge means something, and every pattern of wedges becomes a sentence, a law, a prayer. It's all incredibly tidy, and honestly, you start to feel guilty about every time you've texted with typos. One of the younger scribes laughs softly at his own crooked marks and mutters under his breath. The head scribe looks up, raises an eyebrow, and with a wry smile says something that probably translates to, "Clay forgives no one." Everyone chuckles, including you. Humor, apparently, transcends 4,000 years. You take a closer look at the tablets around you. Some are narrow and filled with numbers, columns of symbols that keep track of barley, oil, or wool. Others are more spacious, filled with lines that seem to flow like poetry. The scribes are multitasking across eternity. Accountants, journalists, and novelists all rolled into one profession. Historians still argue whether these early scribes were viewed as bureaucrats or artists. Were they simply keeping records, or were they conscious of their power to preserve civilization itself? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe they were just people doing their day's work, unaware that one day their handwriting would be studied under museum lights. A small clay jar sits nearby, filled with styluses, some thin, some blunt, all worn smooth by use. One apprentice picks up a fresh reed and sharpens it carefully with a shard of obsidian. He blows off the dust and tests the edge against his thumb, nodding in satisfaction. Watching him, you can't help but think of modern students clicking their pens before an exam. Different tools, same ritual. The head scribe gestures for you to try. He hands you a small tablet, its surface smooth and cool. You take the stylus awkwardly and press down. The clay resists at first, then yields. You pull back and see the mark you've made, a small wedge, surprisingly neat. He nods approvingly, then adds your mark beside his own, whispering, "Now your hand joins ours." It's a simple moment, but it feels profound. For a fleeting instant, you've added your own voice to the world's oldest conversation. Nearby, another scribe leans over his tablet, muttering something about merchants and missing shipments. You catch the word Iana, the name of a temple. He's recording offerings, jars of honey, sacks of barley, bolts of dyed cloth. His lines are crisp, his rhythm steady. He's done this so many times that his hand moves almost independently of thought. But not every tablet is so serious. One apprentice laughs as he shows you his practice piece, a mock letter to the gods complaining about how boring his teacher is. The others laugh too, and even the head scribe can't help but smile. You imagine that somewhere in a museum drawer, there's still a tablet like this, preserved by accident, waiting to reveal that even ancient students got sarcastic. A light breeze drifts through the courtyard, carrying the scent of river mud and crushed reeds. You realize how fragile this whole setup is. The clay could crack, the reed could split. The entire writing system could vanish with one lost generation of teachers. Yet it doesn't. Somehow, despite wars and floods, this art endures. Here's your quirky tidbit for the night. The scribes had a version of spell check. They kept model tablets, sort of like ancient textbooks, with perfect examples of writing. Apprentices would copy them line by line until they could reproduce every symbol flawlessly. It's like having a dusty version of Grammarly, minus the annoying pop-up corrections. You step back and watch as the scribes start stacking finished tablets onto shelves. Each one is small, barely the size of your hand, but together they hold entire archives. Some will go to temples, others to merchants or kings. Each tablet is both message and monument. It's oddly humbling to realize that the first libraries in human history began not with scrolls or books, but with piles of clay. When the afternoon sun grows too harsh, the scribes cover their work and stretch their arms. One of them yawns so loudly you almost join in. Writing, it seems, is tiring in any century. They move to the shade of a fig tree and sip watered beer from small clay cups, chatting idly about the flood schedule or which god's feast is coming next. You sit with them, the stylus still warm in your hand. It strikes you that everything around you, the architecture, the rituals, the stories, exists because someone, somewhere, took the time to record. Without these quiet scribes, the empires of Mesopotamia would have been swallowed whole by time. Instead, they left echoes pressed into earth. The head scribe gestures toward a small storage room. Inside, the shelves are lined with tablets, stacked like bricks, each one labeled in careful wedge marks. He calls it a bit-tupi, a house of tablets. You smile. That's their word for library. The air in there feels different, cooler, older, like standing inside a memory. You run your fingers along a row of tablets, each one smooth and slightly warm from the sun. You can almost hear whispers, not of people, but of words themselves. Before you leave, the scribe presses one small cracked tablet into your palm. It's practice, he says. The writing's faint, almost erased, but you can make out the faint outline of a few symbols. Maybe it's a name, maybe it's nothing, but you feel an odd sense of responsibility, like you're holding a piece of someone's unfinished thought. Outside, the city hums again, merchants shouting, dogs barking, children laughing, yet the sound that stays with you is softer, the gentle tap-tap-tap of a stylus meeting clay. That rhythm feels eternal, as if every modern keystroke or pen scratch still echoes it somehow. You look up at the sky, already deepening toward dusk, and think about how something as simple as a wedge pressed into mud became the foundation of human memory. The scribes probably never imagined their marks would last thousands of years, but they did. Maybe that's the beauty of it. You never really know what will endure, what small act will carry forward beyond your lifetime. A dog barks again. A kiln flares to life somewhere behind you, and the smell of baked clay mingles with the warmth of the evening air. You take a deep breath and smile. The scribe's secret art isn't really about writing, it's about trust. Trust that a fleeting thought can find permanence, that a handful of mud can become a monument to memory. And maybe, just maybe, that's why you're here tonight. Listening, imagining, remembering. The next morning, you find yourself in a small workshop tucked between a potter's stall and a spice vendor, the air thick with the scent of cinnamon, dust, and wet clay. It's here, amid this comforting chaos, that the world's first true writing system slowly emerges, cuneiform. You crouch beside a workbench where a young scribe in training is hunched over a lump of clay, tongue sticking out in concentration, stylus poised. He's not just writing words, he's writing evolution. At first glance, it all seems abstract, rows of neat, angular marks. But every one of those wedges has a lineage, a story of transformation from picture to symbol to sound. You lean closer, trying to imagine how this shift began. Long before these precise patterns, people in this land used to draw little sketches of sheep, jars, fish, and heads of grain. Each one stood for an idea. It was simple, intuitive, and worked just fine, until someone tried to count 27 sheep instead of one. Suddenly, pictures weren't enough. So they got clever. They started adding marks for numbers, then simplifying pictures into symbols. A sheep became a few strokes. A jar turned into a triangle. A mountain? 3 wavy lines. Gradually, the marks stopped being pictures altogether. They became sounds. The leap from image to syllable changed everything. You can feel it, even now. That moment when writing stopped merely showing the world and started speaking it. Historians still argue whether this leap was accidental or deliberate. Did someone consciously decide to use a symbol for its sound value, or did it just sort of happen through years of laziness and shorthand? Knowing humans, it was probably both, a happy mix of innovation and "I'm tired of drawing tiny cows every day." The young apprentice in front of you wipes his brow, leaving a streak of clay across his forehead. He mutters something in Sumerian, maybe a curse at the sun or his stylus, then scratches out a crooked line and starts again. His teacher watches silently, arms crossed, as the boy presses each wedge with renewed focus. It's tedious work, but it's also monumental. Each press of the stylus another heartbeat in the evolution of writing. You glance at the teacher's tablet, a more polished example. The lines are perfectly aligned, the symbols crisp and elegant. You can see how cuneiform got its name. Cunis means wedge in Latin, a name given centuries later by scholars who stumbled across these mysterious impressions and had no idea what they meant. To them, it was as if the earth itself had learned to whisper in geometry. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some of the earliest tablets weren't meant to be read at all. They were basically data packets, clay envelopes containing small tokens used for accounting. Merchants would seal them and stamp little marks on the outside to show what was inside. Over time, they realized they didn't need the tokens anymore, just the marks. Congratulations, humanity had just invented symbolic language and receipts. As you watch the apprentice continue, you start to notice the rhythm of it. The steady press, lift, turn, press again. It's hypnotic, like watching waves hit the shore or hearing rain on a window. The marks aren't random. They flow in a specific order, left to right, top to bottom, like modern text. You start to imagine the first storyteller sitting by lamplight, recording a myth this way. Each wedge a soft footstep into eternity. The teacher picks up one of the apprentice's tablets and reads aloud, his voice low and measured. You can't understand the words, but you recognize the cadence. A list of offerings, perhaps, or maybe a poem disguised as an inventory. The sound of it feels ancient and soothing. It occurs to you that this was the world's first true written voice, the beginning of an unbroken chain that stretches all the way to the device you're watching on right now. Somewhere outside, a cart rumbles past, and a stray goat sticks its head through the doorway, chewing idly on a discarded reed. The apprentice swats at it, scolding like someone's younger sibling. The goat stares back, unimpressed, and munches harder. The teacher sighs, mutters something about goats of ignorance, and shoos it away. You can't help but smile. Even in the dawn of literacy, classroom distractions existed. When the lesson ends, the teacher gathers his tablets carefully and places them in a wooden box lined with straw. These aren't sacred texts yet, just exercises, bookkeeping, and practice lines. But centuries from now, archaeologists will dig them up and study them like holy relics, piecing together how language itself learned to stand upright. You step out into the street, the sunlight bouncing off pale mud brick walls. The marketplace buzzes with traders calling out prices for grain, beer, and cloth. You catch snippets of language everywhere, shouted, sung, bargained, but now you hear it differently. Every sound, every syllable is a potential wedge on clay. The whole city feels like a living script. You wander toward the temple again. Inside, the head priest stands before a table covered in freshly written tablets. These aren't for trade or school, they're for the gods. The priest believes that writing itself has power, that words pressed into clay are more permanent than spoken prayers. The gods hear the stylus, he says, because it remembers. You watch as he offers one of the tablets to an altar fire, then changes his mind at the last second, maybe realizing that burning his records isn't great policy, and instead places it gently among others on a shelf. The act feels both sacred and practical, which pretty much sums up ancient Mesopotamia. Outside, you find a small boy tracing shapes in the dust with a stick, copying what he's seen his father write. His lines are uneven but recognizable. When he finishes, he looks up at you proudly and says a single word you recognize: tupu, tablet. It's the same word that will survive for centuries, echoing through Akkadian, Assyrian, Babylonian. You say it back to him softly, and his grin widens. Language, you realize, isn't just about symbols, it's about connection. Historians still debate the pace of cuneiform spread. Did it ripple outward through trade routes, or did neighboring cultures invent their own scripts, inspired by rumor and envy? However it happened, the influence was enormous. From this humble wedge mark system grew the writing traditions of Persia, Anatolia, and beyond. Even when the symbols changed, the idea that thought could be captured in matter remained. You stop near a kiln, glowing faintly in the afternoon heat. Inside, tablets harden slowly, the air shimmering above them. Someone has scratched a few test marks on the outside, simple lines, yet they shimmer like the beginnings of a constellation. You can almost imagine a parallel universe where each wedge is a star and each tablet a night sky, holding stories that will never fade. Here's another curious fact. Scribes sometimes used clay tablets as temporary notes, quick messages to be wiped clean later, kind of like ancient sticky notes. They'd scribble something down, deliver it, and then reuse the clay, which means for every tablet we found, countless others were erased, rewritten, and lost. Humanity's first drafts literally dissolved in water. As evening falls, the workshop empties, leaving only the faint smell of river silt and warm dust. You linger a moment, running your fingers over a half-finished tablet left on the bench. The marks are shallow, uncertain. Someone learning to write their name, maybe. You trace it gently, half wishing you could tell them that their experiment worked, that their invention lasted not just a lifetime, but civilizations. The light dims. Somewhere, a scribe closes his toolkit, the styluses clinking softly together. A dog barks, a kiln door shuts, and the day's words, thousands of them, cool slowly in the dark. You take one last look at the tablets lined up like sleeping thoughts and think about how everything you know, the books you read, the messages you send, even the story you're hearing right now, owes its existence to this, to a wedge pressed into wet clay by someone who refused to let a thought disappear. The next evening drifts in softly over the plains of Mesopotamia, carrying the scent of baked earth and barley. The day's heat fades, and the city exhales. You find yourself once more wandering through the quiet heart of an ancient metropolis, perhaps perhaps Nineveh, perhaps somewhere that no longer exists except in memory. Before you, an unassuming doorway leads into a world that still breathes through clay. A library, though not the kind with wooden shelves or bound pages. Inside, it feels cool and still. The floor is swept smooth, the air faintly scented with oil and dust. You blink as your eyes adjust to the dim light. Rows upon rows of low shelves line the walls, stacked not with scrolls, but with tablets. Thousands of them. Some fit in your palm. Others are heavy enough to require 2 hands. Each one bears tiny wedges pressed with patience and precision, a language carved into the very bones of the earth. You realize, slowly, that this isn't just a library. It's an archive of an entire civilization's memory. The clay whispers softly under your fingertips, and you can almost hear the faint rustle of styluses scratching in the distance, as though the scribes never really left. A gray-bearded archivist greets you quietly, his voice steady but gentle, like someone who has spent a lifetime surrounded by silence. His fingers are permanently stained with clay, his nails etched with faint dust. He gestures for you to follow. "We keep everything," he says, "from taxes to hymns. A temple must never forget." He lifts a tablet from the shelf and holds it beneath a hanging oil lamp. The light plays across the surface, revealing line after line of neat, deliberate wedges. "This," he says, "is an inventory of sheep from 3 generations ago. The herders are long gone, their children grown and buried, but their flocks are still counted here." You smile faintly. The thought is strangely comforting, that even something as ordinary as livestock could be immortalized. The archivist replaces the tablet carefully, then leads you deeper. The library is larger than it first appeared. Hallway after hallway, shelves upon shelves. Some rooms are strictly administrative, filled with ledgers, contracts, and lists of offerings. Others hold hymns and prayers, each line meant to be recited in rhythm with the heartbeat of the temple. And deeper still, in a small, locked chamber, are the epics, the great stories of gods and heroes that shaped the Mesopotamian world. He opens the door with reverence. Inside, a faint golden glow dances across the walls, reflected from the smooth surfaces of carefully fired tablets. You step closer and see a familiar name, Gilgamesh, the oldest epic in the world, preserved line by line in clay. The archivist's voice lowers to a whisper. "These were copied again and again," he says. "Each scribe learned by rewriting them. Every mark you see was made by human hands, guided by devotion and memory." You lean closer. The marks are steady, practiced, tiny wedges arranged with near mathematical precision. But between them, in the smallest imperfections, you can almost sense the heartbeat of the writer. A hesitation here, a correction there, a small smudge where a finger brushed against wet clay. The story of a king searching for immortality has itself become immortal through this fragile material. The archivist smiles faintly at your fascination. "Clay is humble," he says, "but patient. Papyrus burns, parchment rots, stone breaks, but clay endures. It remembers the fire that made it." He shows you another tablet, this one cracked, its edges chipped away. "Even when broken," he says, "it still speaks. We can read what survives and imagine what was lost." You picture it, scribes hunched over their benches centuries ago, shaping tablets before the morning sun, sealing them with care, and stacking them neatly in wooden boxes or woven baskets. Each tablet a message to the future, never knowing if anyone would read it. Some were prayers sent skyward, others mere bureaucratic notes, but all became time capsules. As you walk further, you begin to sense the order behind the chaos. The tablets are grouped not just by content, but by purpose. Agricultural records are near the front, mythological texts deeper inside. Some are wrapped in clay envelopes, inscribed with summaries, like ancient book covers. The organization feels astonishingly modern. The archivist gestures toward a tall shelf filled with cracked, reddish tablets. "Those came from the royal storehouse," he says. "When the palace fell, fires swept through the city. The tablets baked harder than the potter's kiln could ever manage. The walls turned to ash, but the words," he pauses, almost reverent, "the words survived." You think about that for a moment. Fire, meant to destroy, became a preserver. What should have erased their history instead locked it into permanence. A small window lets in a sliver of light, illuminating motes of dust that dance like ancient souls in the air. You watch them drift and settle over the clay, a silent snowfall of memory. Somewhere outside, a priest chants in a courtyard. The faint sound of water trickling from a fountain fills the silence between breaths. The archivist hands you a small tablet, light enough to cradle in one palm. This one, he says, is a letter. You tilt it toward the light and see the familiar wedge patterns, but this time they're arranged with a certain rhythm, almost like the rise and fall of speech. A letter from a mother to her son, he explains. She asks if he has eaten well, she reminds him to pray, she worries he is working too hard. It could have been written yesterday. You feel a warmth spread through you, a recognition that across 5,000 years, human hearts have not changed so much. The clay feels warm in your hand, but maybe that's just your pulse beating against it. You imagine all the voices these tablets carry, the stern commands of kings, the weary jokes of merchants, the gentle prayers of farmers hoping for rain. Each wedge a fragment of a vanished life. In one corner of the library, you find a shelf reserved for what the archivist calls learning tablets. They are covered in mistakes, scribbles, and corrections, the practice work of students. Some contain doodles of animals, others notes from frustrated teachers. One tablet, clearly old and smudged, bears a simple phrase written several times over. "I will not talk during lessons." You can't help but chuckle softly. Some things truly never change. The archivist notices and smiles knowingly. Every scribe begins with clay under the fingernails, he says. The words come later. He shows you the final chamber, a storage vault kept cool and dry, lined with thick stone walls. Inside are thousands more tablets, stacked neatly and labeled with clay tags. Some are sealed in jars. These are the records that matter most, he explains. We preserve the contracts of kings and the laws of the land. If a dispute arises, we can read what was written, and truth will speak for itself. It dawns on you then that writing, here, was not just a way to tell stories. It was the foundation of civilization itself, a system of memory that allowed society to function beyond the limits of oral tradition. The tablets weren't just preserving myths, they were preserving order. The archivist leads you back toward the entrance. The night air meets you like a sigh, cool and fragrant. Behind you, the library glows faintly, as if the clay itself were lit from within. You realize that each of those small, fragile objects has outlived the empires that created them. The kings who commissioned them are dust, their temples gone, their cities buried. But their words remain, pressed into clay by hands that once trembled just like yours. You pause at the doorway, looking back one last time. The archivist nods, understanding. When we write, he says quietly, we speak twice, once to our time, and once to every time that follows. Outside, the stars shimmer above the dark river, the same constellations those ancient scribes once looked upon. Somewhere far beneath your feet, thousands more tablets still sleep, waiting patiently to be found. They have no voices of their own, yet if you listen closely enough, you can almost hear them murmuring through the ages, a slow, eternal whisper of memory baked into the bones of the earth. And as you drift away from the city, the sound of that whisper follows you into the quiet of the night, steady, rhythmic, unbroken. The world's first library, breathing softly in the dark. You wake to a pale dawn spilling gently over the rooftops of a Mesopotamian city. The air smells faintly of clay dust and damp reeds. The world still quiet, except for the distant bleating of goats and the murmur of the river. You stretch, feeling the warmth of the first light on your face, and wander back toward the scribes' quarter, the place where memory becomes marks, and marks become the pulse of civilization. You've seen the grand tablets, the laws, the epics, the royal decrees, but today is different. Today, you glimpse the ordinary lives pressed into clay, The simple, the mundane, the utterly human. Inside the scribe's courtyard, the day's work has already begun. Apprentices kneel beside shallow trays filled with water and smooth lumps of freshly cut river clay. The air hums with quiet focus. A teacher, a patient man with a shaved head and a voice like dry parchment, paces slowly behind them, correcting the angle of each wedge. "Gentle pressure," he says, "not stabbing. You are writing, not hunting." You crouch beside a young student whose fingers tremble slightly as he writes. His tablet reads something very unheroic. 3 jars of sesame oil, delivered to the temple kitchen. It's a receipt, a grocery list carved into eternity. He looks up at you nervously, and you can't help but grin. "Don't worry," you whisper. "Historians still argue whether ancient accountants ever got the numbers right." He chuckles, just a little, and presses another careful wedge into the clay. Nearby, another student copies lines from a model tablet. The text is familiar now: a letter, a record, a contract. You realize that the scribal schools were not just producing bureaucrats, they were shaping the memory of their cities. Every transaction, every harvest, every marriage promise, recorded. Nothing was too small for clay. You wander through the open courtyard, stopping at a table where a scribe is writing what appears to be a household inventory. 1 bronze cup, he murmurs, 2 reed mats, 4 clay jars of beer, 1 slightly lazy goat. You raise an eyebrow at that last entry. He glances up, grinning. "She keeps eating the laundry," he explains. Even bureaucracy, it seems, had a sense of humor. You walk on, reading the tablets laid out to dry in the sun. One lists wages for temple workers, another rations for soldiers. There's a note about a farmer renting oxen for the harvest, and another, heartbreakingly small, detailing a loan of a few handfuls of grain. You trace the marks gently, imagining the hands that pressed them, calloused, dusty, living lives as fragile and vivid as your own. A thought flickers through your mind. This is the quiet heartbeat of civilization. Not kings or conquerors, but bakers, potters, and shepherds leaving whispers for the future. You move deeper into the scribe's quarter and stumble upon a curious sight: a small stack of clay letters waiting to be delivered. One catches your attention. It's addressed to "My brother in Ur." You tilt it toward the light and read, slowly, through the patient wedges. "The barley arrived late, and the workers complain of sore feet. Please send more oil. Also, the donkey is sick again." You can't help but smile. Even across 4,000 years, the tone feels familiar. The rhythm of everyday frustration is timeless. "I am well. I hope you and the children are safe. I will return when the river lowers. Do not forget to feed the white goat. She bites if hungry." You pause on that last line, feeling something softened inside you. Clay can't carry emotion, yet somehow it does. A scribe notices your interest and beckons you closer. "Letters are the soul of the city," he says. "When we write them, we speak to those far away and to those yet to come." He flips through a stack of tablets and shows you one inscribed with what looks like a short poem. The wedges dance across the surface with rhythm and care. He reads softly, "May the sun favor your path, my friend, and may your shadow never fall across dry wells. When you eat, think of me." The words linger in the warm air. It isn't epic or divine, just a quiet message of friendship, and that makes it even more powerful. As you walk along the rows of drying tablets, you start to notice something else. Marks that don't quite fit the usual patterns. Doodles. A small sketch of a fish. A crude drawing of a face with wide eyes. A stick figure holding what might be a beer jug. "Practice tablets," the scribe explains, smiling. "Sometimes the students draw when their minds wander. We all do." Even the earliest writers had trouble focusing on their work. Some things never change. In the corner of the courtyard, a woman wearing a linen shawl carefully arranges tablets into baskets. She explains that she's preparing them for storage in the temple archives. "We keep records of offerings," she says, "so the gods don't forget what they're owed." She taps one tablet lightly. "This one says 2 jars of honey for Inanna. Sweet, yes? She has expensive taste." You chuckle, imagining the goddess of love and war demanding honey with divine seriousness. The woman smiles knowingly. "If we stop writing," she adds, "maybe she stops listening." You wander through the narrow streets, feeling the rhythm of daily life all around you. The market is coming alive now, the smell of bread mingling with that of spices and smoke. Merchants shout prices, donkeys clatter past, and in the midst of it all, a young boy carries a small clay tablet wrapped in cloth, a message perhaps, or an invoice. He will deliver it, and someone else will respond, and together their clay conversation will join the great mosaic of human life. You pause beside a stall selling oil lamps and ask the merchant how he keeps track of his sales. He shrugs. "Scribe writes it," he says. "I just count coins." You grin. Division of labor, an invention as old as trade itself. That evening, as the sun dips below the ziggurat, you find yourself sitting by the river, watching a group of children play. One of them molds a lump of clay into the shape of a small tablet, pressing lines into it with a stick. "What are you writing?" you ask. She looks up proudly. "My name," she says, "so I don't forget it." You nod, your throat tightening just a little. That's what it all comes down to, isn't it? The desire not to be forgotten, to leave something behind that says, "I was here." The sound of the river deepens as twilight falls. The air cools, and a thin mist rises from the banks. You close your eyes for a moment, imagining the millions of marks pressed into clay across centuries, all the ordinary words that built the foundations of human history. Every wedge, a tiny act of resistance against the tide of forgetting. Historians still argue whether the Mesopotamians truly saw writing as art or merely as record-keeping. But perhaps it doesn't matter. Whether a temple list or a love note, every tablet was a promise that life, messy, repetitive, beautiful life, was worth remembering. Somewhere nearby, a baker counts his loaves aloud, a shepherd calls to his flock, and a student sighs over a tablet he'll have to recopy in the morning. Their voices rise and fall like a lullaby carried by the wind. You open your eyes to the fading glow of the city and realize how much of this world was built on the backs of quiet scribes and anonymous workers who wrote not for glory, but for continuity. Their words may have been routine, even dull, but through them, their world endures. As night drapes itself over the city, you can still see faint fires burning in the courtyards where tablets dry in rows. They gleam like tiny stars against the earth, each one holding a piece of someone's day, someone's hope, someone's voice. And as the last light fades, you understand that immortality isn't only for kings and heroes. It also lives in shopping lists, in receipts for grain, in letters between friends, and in the quiet certainty that clay remembers what we try so hard not to lose. The night air feels cooler now, touched by a faint breeze sweeping across the plains. You sit on a low stone step outside the library, the stars stretching wide above you. The city sleeps, but the clay does not. It hums softly with stories too old to belong to any one person. And among them all, one name rises again and again: Gilgamesh. You trace it on a tablet you've borrowed from the archivist, your fingers following the careful wedges pressed by some ancient hand. You can almost feel the pulse of the scribe who carved it, the rhythm of someone who knew they were shaping something sacred, something meant to outlast even kings. The tale begins simply enough. A king of Uruk, half god, half man, mighty and restless. But in the flicker of your oil lamp, the story feels alive, as if you're hearing it whispered across 5,000 years. You picture him now, Gilgamesh, standing tall against the dawn, his city behind him, his gaze fixed on the unknown. The walls of Uruk gleam like bronze in the morning light. You hear the murmurs of his people, the sound of sandals on the dust, and somewhere a harp begins to play the opening notes of the oldest story ever told. It's strange how easily your mind drifts into it, how naturally the story pulls you in. You aren't just listening, you're there, walking beside him through legend and clay. Gilgamesh, the king who wanted to be more than mortal, who ruled his people so fiercely that even the gods took notice, who met his equal, the wild man Enkidu, born from the wilderness itself. Their friendship, so unlikely, so human, becomes the heart of it all. Together, they defy the gods, slay monsters, and stand shoulder to shoulder against the chaos of their world. The tablet beneath your hand records it all in neat, methodical lines. Each wedge a breath of an ancient poet. Each pause a heartbeat. The archivist once told you that versions of this epic were found across centuries and cities: Akkadian, Sumerian, Babylonian. It traveled in pieces, he'd said, copied and recopied, each time slightly changed, like whispers across generations. You smile faintly. Even the first written story in history had fan edits. You read on, eyes tracing the tale of Enkidu's death, how grief turned the mighty king into a wanderer, searching for the secret of immortality. The lamp flickers, and the tablet's shadows seem to move like living things. You can feel Gilgamesh's sorrow, his stubborn defiance of time. When he finally finds the old immortal Utnapishtim, the survivor of the Great Flood, you can almost hear the waves crashing, smell the salt on the wind. The flood itself, scholars say, may have been inspired by real disasters, the Tigris overflowing or a river swallowing entire villages. Historians still argue whether this flood myth seeded later ones, Noah's, Deucalion's, and others. But in this quiet night, it hardly matters. The story feels universal, written in the clay of human fear, the fear of loss, of forgetting, of ending. You set the tablet down and stare into the dark. The city is silent, save for the faint clink of a night watchman's staff in the distance. And you think about the irony. Gilgamesh searched for eternal life and failed. Yet here you are, 5 millennia later, speaking his name aloud. The man who could not live forever found another kind of immortality, etched in wet clay, baked in fire, buried, rediscovered. The tablet is cracked in places. Whole lines are missing. You can't help wondering what was lost, what words fell away into dust. Maybe there were more dreams, more grief, more laughter. Historians still argue whether the missing verses change the meaning of the tale or not. But you suspect that, like all great stories, it survives precisely because of its gaps. Those silences invite imagination. They leave room for you. You flip the tablet gently and notice faint impressions along the edge, notes from the scribe who copied it long after the original had been written. It reads something like, "I have copied this faithfully. My hand grows tired, but the story endures." You can almost see him, squinting in the dim light, stretching his back, sighing as he presses the final wedge. Maybe he, too, wondered what it all meant. You smile to yourself. Thousands of years later, you're still wondering. A cool gust stirs the dust around your feet. You close your eyes and imagine how these tablets once traveled, by riverboat, by caravan, by hand. How storytellers recited them in courtyards while children dozed and dogs barked in the distance. The world changes, but the rhythm of storytelling stays the same. The flicker of firelight, the murmur of words, the quiet that follows. You imagine hearing it now, in its original tongue. The cadence would be strange to your ears, the words heavy and musical, but you'd understand it anyway. Grief and longing sound the same in any language. At some point, you realize you've been tracing the same line of text over and over, the moment when Gilgamesh returns to Uruk and gazes upon its mighty walls. The final lines of the epic don't promise divine wisdom or eternal life. Instead, they celebrate the city, the work of human hands. It's as if the story is whispering, "You can't live forever, but your creations might." You tilt your head, considering that. Maybe every tablet, every scribble, every line pressed into clay was their way of building walls against time, just as solid as Uruk's. And maybe yours are digital, pixels instead of clay, but they're built for the same reason. The archivist's voice echoes faintly in your memory. Stories are the only architecture that never collapses. You glance down again. The tablet's surface glows softly in the lamplight, the wedges forming rivers of shadow and light. You can't help but marvel at the precision, how these symbols, once meaningless scratches, have carried not just information, but emotion across ages. The scribe who pressed them never knew your world, yet somehow reached you. A faint chuckle escapes your lips. Congratulations, Gilgamesh. You made it. You made it. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks at the night, and the echo bounces off the ancient walls. You feel a strange comfort in that sound, the persistence of simple things, life continuing. You stand, brushing clay dust from your hands, and gaze toward the dark silhouette of the ziggurat rising against the stars. You can almost picture Gilgamesh standing there beside you, silent but proud, surveying his city. Maybe, for a moment, he too understood that legacy isn't about defeating death. It's about being remembered kindly, told softly, retold endlessly. You wonder how many other stories are buried under your feet, waiting for light. How many kings and shepherds and lovers have whispered to the clay? How many voices are still sleeping? As the lamp burns low, you carefully return the tablet to its shelf. It rests among hundreds of others, each with its own heartbeat. You press your palm gently against the cool surface, as if to thank it. And in that moment, you realize that this clay, this simple, unassuming clay, has succeeded where gods and kings failed. It has carried humanity forward. When you finally turn to leave, the sky above Uruk is a pale silver. The first call to prayer echoes softly across the fields, and the world feels impossibly old and new at once. You smile to yourself, knowing that somewhere in the folds of time, Gilgamesh is still walking, his story forever pressing forward, line by line, tablet by tablet, life by life. The sun climbs slowly over the flat horizon, pouring light across baked rooftops and temple courtyards. You walk through the quiet city as it stirs awake, smoke curling from small hearths, the distant clang of bronze tools echoing faintly through the alleys. Ahead, the grand ziggurat rises like a mountain of brick and faith, layer upon layer reaching toward the heavens. Today, you're not here for kings or heroes. Today, you're here for the gods, those eternal figures who once shaped the Mesopotamian world and found their immortality not in temples or statues, but in clay. At the base of the ziggurat, a scribe waits for you. He's older than most, his beard streaked with white, his hands perpetually dusted with ochre and clay. He greets you with a knowing smile, the kind shared by those who have spent too long listening to whispers from the past. You've seen our ledgers and our stories, he says, but this is where the divine resides. He leads you into the temple library, a dim, perfumed chamber lined with shelves of tablets. The air smells of incense and earth, the mixture oddly soothing. Rows upon rows of clay rectangles sit neatly stacked, each one carrying the names of gods, the rituals that pleased them, and the hymns meant to coax their attention. The scribe picks one up reverently. This tablet, he says, tells how to call upon Enki, the god of wisdom, when a river floods. You read the lines aloud, sprinkle water from a sacred bowl, and pray the current softens its anger. He traces a wedge with his finger, eyes distant. We wrote these words so we would not forget how to ask the universe for mercy. You glance around the chamber. Hundreds, maybe thousands of such prayers. To the gods of wind and rain, of fertility and harvest, of war and medicine. Every natural force, every fear, every hope, captured and catalogued. Humanity's first theology pressed into clay. You step closer to a small niche carved into the wall. Inside sits a set of tablets blackened by fire, but still legible. These were found in the ruins of a temple at Nippur, the scribe says, a hymn to Inanna, the goddess of love and war. Listen. He clears his throat softly, then begins to read. His voice trembles, low and rhythmic. O the goddess of love and war. O the goddess of war and might and fear. O the bow of homily. This is my love. Queen of heaven, bright torch of dawn, your glory floods the fields like the morning sun. You are fierce in battle, tender in song. You lift the weary and humble the strong. You close your eyes. The chant is ancient, but somehow its rhythm feels familiar, steady, melodic, like the rise and fall of a heartbeat. The words echo against the temple walls, and for a moment, you imagine the priests and priestesses who once sang them by torchlight, their voices weaving smoke and devotion into the night. The scribe lowers the tablet gently, smiling faintly. We wrote for the gods, he says, but perhaps we were really writing for ourselves, to remember that we belong to something larger. You nod slowly. There's a quiet beauty in that, the idea that worship was also a kind of preservation, a dialogue between human fragility and divine permanence. He leads you to another shelf, stacked high with tablets so small you could mistake them for coasters. Offerings, he explains. Each one records a gift made to the gods. Barley, beer, oxen, honey. Even, he pauses, glancing at one tablet with a wry smile, a pair of sandals. Someone must have thought the divine feet needed new shoes. You laugh softly. Practical devotion, you say. He chuckles. Exactly. The gods may be eternal, but they appreciate good craftsmanship. As you move deeper into the chamber, you find a section filled entirely with what the scribe calls ritual tablets. Detailed instructions, when to burn incense, how many times to repeat a chant, which direction to face. It's all written with such precision that you can almost see the ceremony unfold before you. Priests moving in slow circles, the smell of oil lamps, the shimmer of gold-threaded robes. You notice one particularly large tablet, its surface covered in nearly microscopic text. What's this one, you ask? The scribe hesitates. That, he says, is the Enuma Elish, the story of creation. His voice takes on a tone of reverence. It tells how Marduk slew the dragon Tiamat, carved the heavens and earth from her body, and made humans to serve the gods. You read a few lines and feel a strange shiver. The imagery is vast, cosmic oceans, storms, divine battles. But beneath it, you sense something deeply human. The desire to explain, to understand where everything began. You can almost imagine those first listeners sitting cross-legged in the glow of a fire, hearing the story for the first time, feeling the universe make a kind of sense. Historians still argue whether these creation myths were purely symbolic or reflections of natural events, storms, floods, even eclipses, that the ancients struggled to explain. But the scribe only smiles when you mention this. A good story, he says, is always both. You turn another tablet over in your hands and notice something unusual, a series of repeated wedge patterns that seem to imitate rhythm. "This one looks like poetry," you murmur. He nods. "Hymns, laments, lullabies for the gods. We sang to them as we might sing to a child, to comfort them, or maybe to comfort ourselves." He reaches into a small chest and produces a cracked, palm-sized tablet. "This one," he says quietly, "was found in a grave. A man buried with a prayer to Nergal, god of the underworld. He must have hoped it would serve as a letter of introduction to make the afterlife less lonely." You study the faint marks, and suddenly the idea of death feels less terrifying. If even the underworld has mail service, maybe there's comfort in continuity. A quiet laugh escapes you, but your voice softens as you ask, "Did they really believe the gods could read?" The scribe's eyes crinkle kindly. "Perhaps not with eyes," he says, "but belief has a way of listening." You linger near a wall where fragments of tablets are laid out on a low table. The pieces are arranged like a puzzle, each one labeled with small tags. "These are still being translated," he explains, "the words of forgotten deities. Some names appear only once, tiny gods of rivers, of insects, of door hinges." You blink. "Door hinges?" He laughs softly. "When you live in a world of storms and dust, even a hinge deserves divine supervision." You smile, imagining the everyday holiness of it. A god for every need, every sound, every fear in the dark. The scribe looks around the room fondly. "We wrote to remember them," he says, "because gods fade when names are lost. Every tablet you see here is a promise, never to let them vanish completely." You think about that as you gaze at the walls lined with clay. Each tablet is a quiet rebellion against forgetting, a declaration that faith, whatever form it takes, deserves to be remembered. The air grows still. Outside, the city hums faintly in the distance, but here inside the temple, time feels suspended. You close your eyes and listen, to the rustle of the scribe's robes, to the whisper of clay against stone, to the echo of words meant for gods who may or may not still be listening. And somewhere, between the silence and the soft hum of history, you realize that these prayers worked, not because they summoned lightning or rain, but because they endured. The gods may have faded, but their worshippers' words still breathe. The tablets have done their duty. You smile quietly to yourself. "So the gods live on," you murmur, "in the language of clay." The scribe nods. "Yes," he says softly, "and as long as you read them, they're still alive." You run your hand along the shelf one last time, feeling the cool, grainy surface beneath your fingertips. Somewhere behind you, the ziggurat casts its shadow across the city, a mountain of devotion built brick by brick, prayer by prayer. And as you step back into the sunlight, you can almost hear a faint echo from the chambers below, ancient voices rising in unison, their hymns of gratitude and awe carried upward on a breeze that never quite fades. The day fades into a haze of copper and gold, the air thick with the scent of dust and far-off storms. You find yourself standing at the edge of a ruin, stones scattered, walls collapsed, the faint trace of what was once a city stretching out before you like a memory half remembered. You kick gently at the earth, and a fragment of baked clay peeks through the sand. You crouch, brush it off carefully, and there it is again, those familiar wedge-shaped marks. Another voice from the past refusing to be quiet. You look around and realize that while the people of Mesopotamia built kingdoms that rose and fell like the tides of the Tigris and Euphrates, their clay endured. Palaces burned, temples crumbled, and dynasties vanished. But the tablets, those humble slabs of baked mud, somehow survived. It's funny, isn't it? The most fragile-looking thing turned out to be the most eternal. Paper burns. Papyrus decays. Digital files, well, you already know how easily those vanish. But clay, good old earth, stays. As you wander through the ruins, you imagine the chaos that once unfolded here. The sound of hooves thundering at the gates, shouts in languages no one speaks anymore, flames leaping skyward, feeding on wooden beams. And somewhere, in the middle of it all, a terrified scribe clutching his stylus, praying that his tablets might be spared. He probably didn't know that fire, the very thing that destroyed his city, would save his words. When a library burned, the unbaked tablets often hardened in the heat, turning into near indestructible ceramic. You can picture the irony. Empires collapsing while their archives quietly baked themselves into immortality. Historians still argue whether some libraries might have been intentionally fired before abandonment, a kind of emergency preservation measure. But most likely, it was just luck, history's most poetic accident. You lift one small fragment and turn it in the light. The edges are melted slightly, warped by ancient flame, but the writing is still there. You can almost hear the crackle of fire around it, smell the smoke. This tablet, you think, survived a war, maybe two, maybe more. The city around you, once a capital of something grand, is now silent. Maybe it's Babylon, maybe Nineveh, maybe some lesser-known town whose name never made it into your textbooks. They all met the same fate, really. One empire's glory was another's rubble. Akkadians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, they rose, ruled, and vanished like sandcastles under a rising tide. But the stories stayed. You imagine archaeologists, thousands of years later, bent over these same ruins, brushing away the sand with careful strokes, their faces lit by the low morning sun. They speak softly, as if afraid to wake the past. And when they find a tablet, they don't just uncover words, they unearth a heartbeat. You step through a broken archway and enter what might have been a temple courtyard. The ground is uneven, littered with shards of pottery and half-buried bricks. Somewhere beneath your feet, thousands of tablets might still be sleeping. Some may hold royal decrees, others simple market transactions. But among them, hidden in the same dust, lie poems, hymns, letters between lovers, even jokes. Yes, really, ancient jokes. One of the oldest known, scratched onto a tablet, reads, "Something that has never happened since time began. A young woman did not fart in her husband's lap." You chuckle quietly. Proof, if nothing else, that humanity hasn't changed much. The wind picks up, stirring loose sand. You shield your eyes, and for a moment, it's as if the city reappears before you. The walls rise again, the streets fill with traders and children, and somewhere, the scribe you imagined earlier sits cross-legged near a temple wall, writing quickly before the invaders arrive. He presses each wedge into the clay with calm determination. Maybe he's copying a myth, maybe a prayer, maybe the daily records of grain rations that no one will ever read again. He doesn't know that centuries later, you'll be standing here, holding what's left of his work. The world he lived in vanished, but the tablet stayed. And not just this one. Across the ancient Near East, in places like Mari, and Ebla, tens of thousands of clay tablets have been uncovered, many still perfectly legible after 4,000 years. They tell us everything, from epic sagas to inventory lists. Some even contain the names of children who once practiced writing on scraps of clay. Their little exercises preserved longer than entire civilizations. You can almost hear one of those teachers scolding softly. No, not like that. Press firmly. The gods can't read messy wedges. A smile tugs at your lips. It's comforting, somehow, to imagine that learning, love, bureaucracy, and even bad handwriting were part of life long before smartphones and spreadsheets. In another corner of the ruins, you spot a pile of broken tiles. At first, you think it's just debris, but then you notice faint marks on their surfaces. You kneel, brushing the sand aside, and see that each piece once belonged to a much larger tablet. It must have shattered when the building collapsed. You pick up one fragment, barely larger than your palm, and trace the grooves. There's a strange duality in this moment. Everything you see around you, stone, brick, ruin, is evidence of collapse. Yet the tablets in your hands are evidence of survival. They outlasted the kings who commissioned them, the priests who blessed them, even the scribes who wrote them. It's hard not to feel a kind of awe at that resilience. You sit for a while on a broken wall, tablet balanced in your hand. The wind whistles softly through the gaps, carrying the smell of sand and age. A stray date palm bends gently nearby, its fronds rustling like paper. You close your eyes and imagine time passing, the centuries folding over this place like layers of cloth. Rain and drought, birth and war, silence and rediscovery. Maybe the real miracle of Mesopotamian history isn't that its people invented writing, it's that they used it to build continuity out of chaos. They understood something profound. Stories don't die if they're written down. They may go quiet, buried under dust for a few millennia, but they're patient. And clay, it turns out, is the most patient of all. Historians still argue whether this durability was ever the intention, whether the Mesopotamians meant to send messages to the far future, or if it was simply the byproduct of their environment. But it doesn't really matter, does it? The result is the same. You're here, reading words they pressed with their own hands. Time didn't erase them, it just waited until you were ready to listen. You rise, brushing off the dust from your clothes. The sun dips lower, and the ruins glow in the last light, as if lit from within. Somewhere deep below, untouched tablets remain, entire stories yet to see the sky again. You take one last look at the horizon. The empires of Mesopotamia are gone, but their words are everywhere. Museums, archives, even digital libraries. From mud to eternity, their voices carry on. As you turn to leave, the wind picks up again, whispering across the broken stones. It sounds almost like murmured speech, like the faint rustle of someone reciting lines in a language you almost remember. You pause, smile faintly, and whisper back, "I hear you." And in that moment, surrounded by dust, ruin, and the ghostly hum of ancient words, you realize something simple and profound. No empire truly falls if its stories remain. The morning light spills softly over the quiet streets of the city, illuminating the small courtyards where scribes sit, hunched over their work. You approach one of these open-air classrooms, a low stone bench inviting you to sit. Around you, apprentices are kneeling beside shallow basins of clay, their fingers coated with the cool, malleable material. The scent of damp earth mingles with the faint smoke of oil lamps. You realize, as you watch, that this is where the magic begins. Not in kings' palaces, nor in temple towers, but here, at the fingertips of people who know that memory is a craft. A scribe lifts his gaze from a tablet and offers you a small, flat wedge of wood. Stylus, he explains, the simplest of tools, yet capable of preserving eternity. You take it in your hand, noticing how smooth the edges have become from generations of use. He demonstrates a wedge pressed into a soft tablet. The clay yields, taking the shape of the mark, as if it had been waiting for this moment. You try one yourself, pressing gently, then more firmly. The wedge leaves a crisp impression. Tiny, deliberate lines that will survive fire, flood, and time. You marvel at the simplicity of it, an instrument no more complex than a twig, yet capable of transferring thought across millennia. The scribe continues, showing the apprentices how to hold the stylus, the proper angle, the gentle but steady pressure required. Not too sharp, he says. You are not stabbing the clay, you are conversing with it. His voice has the calm cadence of someone used to repetition, but it carries a subtle warmth, a devotion born of respect for his medium. You wander among the students, noticing how seriously they take each mark. One is copying a letter, another a ledger listing the barley deliveries to the temple. You spot faint doodles on the edge of a practice tablet, a crude goat, perhaps a caricature of a teacher. You smile. Even then, humor found its way into the most mundane tasks. The scribe explains the different types of clay they use. Soft river clay for practice, carefully mixed with sand to strengthen it for permanent records, and finer, purer clay for tablets meant to endure. Some are fired in kilns, others baked slowly in the sun. The technique depends on the purpose, he says. A receipt does not need eternity, but an epic deserves the sun and fire. You lean closer to examine one fired tablet. Its surface is cool and hard, the wedge marks precise. You can imagine the scribe pressing each line carefully, knowing the story might outlive him, his king, perhaps even his city. Historians still argue whether scribes saw themselves as artists or merely clerks. But as you hold this tablet, you realize it doesn't matter. They were both, and more. The scribe gestures to another tool, a small brush. We use this to smooth the clay before writing, and to erase mistakes while the clay is still wet. You can always reshape, but the sooner you press the wedge, the more permanent it becomes. You try brushing a soft tablet, feeling the clay respond under your fingers. It's oddly soothing, like tracing the contours of a familiar landscape. Some of the apprentices work on tablets so small they can hold them in one hand. Others press into larger slabs, careful to keep their lines straight and uniform. You watch as one boy furrows his brow, pressing the wedge carefully, then pausing to check his work. You realize that patience is part of the craft. Nothing in clay can be rushed. A girl near the back is copying an epic fragment. Her tablet is cracked in one corner, a previous attempt perhaps, yet she continues with quiet determination. Mistakes teach us, the scribe explains. Clay remembers everything, including the effort you give it. You notice a small wedge pressed incorrectly, then corrected. The imperfection makes it human, real, alive. The scribe leans back and surveys the courtyard. We train them early, he says. A scribe is more than a writer. We are keepers of memory, recorders of gods and kings, poets of the mundane. The stylus is our voice, and clay our audience. You think about that, how a simple tool and a humble material have preserved empires, floods, epics, and daily life. You trace a line of wedge marks on a nearby tablet, feeling the texture under your fingertips. It's as if the past has pressed itself lightly into your hand. You glance around the courtyard and notice a basket of partially dried tablets, each marked with small labels. Some are mundane, lists of grain, dates of festivals, names of temple workers. Others contain prayers, letters, and even riddles. One catches your eye, a short joke scribbled in neat lines. A young man asked the priest if he could hear the gods. The priest replied, "Only if they are not busy counting your debts." You chuckle quietly, imagining the scribe who first wrote it. Humor, it seems, has always been a way to lighten the weight of responsibility. The scribe shows you a particularly large slab, meant to record the deeds of a king. The stylus must press deep to make clear impressions, each line deliberate. The deeper the wedge, the longer it lasts, he explains. Some records are meant to survive centuries, even millennia. You press lightly at first, then more firmly, feeling the clay resist and yield, imprinting your presence alongside the hands of long-dead scribes. You notice that even in mistakes, there is beauty. A crooked line here, a smudged wedge there. Reminders that human hands, not machines, created these records. And yet, through fire and flood, the stories remain legible, preserved in the simplest possible form. The scribe finally gestures to a stack of envelopes, clay shells that once held smaller tablets inside. Even in error, we protect what matters, he says. Sometimes a tablet is nested, folded, or sealed. A message may travel far, survive disaster, and still speak. You hold one, feeling its weight. The surface is smooth, yet beneath it lies the promise of continuity. You rise, brushing your hands, feeling the warm texture of clay lingering on your fingertips. You realize that every wedge you pressed, every tablet you touched, connects you across time to a long chain of scribes who understood a simple truth. Writing is survival. Not survival of bodies, but survival of memory, of thought, of human experience. You step back, observing the courtyard one last time. Students continue their work, the sun climbing higher, and the scribe smiles faintly. You see, he says, we do not just write, we build bridges. Across years, across empires, across the silence of centuries. Clay is our conduit, and the stylus our voice. And as you leave the courtyard, you carry that lesson quietly with you, that even the simplest tools, pressed into humble clay, can outlast kings, temples, and empires, leaving behind a legacy that whispers patiently and unceasingly across the millennia. The afternoon light spills over the ruins like honey, soft and slow, and you find yourself standing before the entrance to what was once the grand archive of a Mesopotamian city. The walls are half collapsed, and vines wind their way through cracks in the baked mud bricks. The air smells faintly of earth and age, the kind of smell that makes you feel like the past is exhaling around you. You step inside carefully, mindful of uneven stones, and realize immediately why archives were sacred. This was not just storage, it was memory made tangible, a place where time itself had been tamed, at least a little. Rows upon rows of shelves once held hundreds, perhaps thousands of clay tablets. Many have crumbled, leaving only fragments behind, but enough remain to form a tangible echo of the city's life. You kneel to examine one, tracing the wedge-shaped impressions that record the sale of a handful of dates and a clay pot. It's mundane, almost trivial, yet you sense the enormity of it. These small transactions were the heartbeat of the city. Historians still argue whether scribes intended these archives to serve as legal proof or simply as a way to remember life. Either way, they worked. You notice a corner where several tablets lean against one another, worn and cracked. A scribal hand must have pressed the wedges here long ago, likely after a long day counting grain or recording temple offerings. The marks are precise, yet human, slightly uneven, with tiny quirks that reveal the scribe's fatigue or perhaps his sense of humor. One wedge seems to curve into a miniature loop, almost like a playful signature, and you grin at the thought that someone 4,000 years ago might have been doodling the way you sometimes do when bored. Deeper into the archive, the air grows cooler, heavier with the weight of knowledge. You step over broken tiles and reach a shelf where larger tablets lie stacked neatly. These are not records of food or taxes, they are stories, hymns, and letters. One tablet catches your eye. Its surface is filled with neat lines detailing a conversation between a merchant and a distant relative about trade routes and promised deliveries of wool. The language is formal, yet there's a tiny aside tucked between lines. He owes me a loaf of bread and still grumbles. You chuckle softly, thinking, even in a world so far removed, some things never change. Nearby, another shelf holds tablets partially encased in clay envelopes, seals still visible, faintly impressed with the symbol of the temple. A scribe might have spent hours pressing each line into the soft clay, then carefully wrapping it, sealing the message for security and posterity. You can almost imagine the slow hands, the quiet focus, the care invested into every single mark. Clay was not just writing, it was protection. You run your fingers lightly over a tablet containing a hymn to the goddess Ninhursag. The lines are long and precise, describing the creation of humankind, the bounty of the earth, the blessings of fertility. There is rhythm here, a gentle cadence meant to be read aloud, and you imagine a priest whispering these words to the gods, offering each syllable as both prayer and poetry. It strikes you that devotion and practicality often walked hand in hand. Worshippers recorded sacred words as meticulously as they recorded barley rations. Some tablets are cracked, broken, even partially buried in dust. You carefully lift one, brushing away centuries of sand, and notice that it contains an accounting of fines for misbehaving citizens. The offenses are mundane: failing to deliver a promised goat, spilling oil during transport, a donkey that wandered away. The precision of the scribe is remarkable, every wedge exact, every line deliberate. And yet, in the midst of it all, you find a tiny note in the margin. He will learn, hopefully, before next harvest. Humor, hope, and humanity tucked between lines of law. Moving through the archive, you reach a small alcove where fragments of tablets lie scattered. Some are nearly illegible, worn smooth by time, yet faint wedge marks remain. You carefully piece them together in your mind like a puzzle. Letters, prayers, minor decrees, even an early version of a calendar. Every mark tells a story of organization, care, and continuity. Every wedge is a tiny act of defiance against forgetfulness. You pause at a shelf stacked with unusually large tablets. They record epic tales: Gilgamesh, Enuma Elish, accounts of kings and gods. You run your hands over the surface and feel the texture of history beneath your fingers. These stories are longer, more intricate, the stylus pressing each wedge with deliberation, shaping sentences that would echo across millennia. And echo they did, through conquest, through the fall of empires, through the silent passage of centuries, they endured. Near the back of the archive, you notice a set of tablets that are smaller and roughly shaped. They're practice tablets, probably used by apprentices learning the craft. Some contain repeated syllables, others show doodles or poorly formed words. You smile at these, the mistakes, the attempts, the learning process. Even errors become part of history when pressed into clay. You pick up one such tablet and feel the weight of the hand that made it. Perhaps it belonged to a child, nervous and eager, pressing each wedge into the soft clay with care. Historians still argue whether these practice tablets were considered important enough to preserve intentionally, or if their survival is mere chance. Either way, they offer an intimate glimpse into daily life, a small human heartbeat in a massive, enduring archive. A sudden gust of wind enters through a broken window, raising a faint cloud of dust. You cough softly, blinking, and notice tiny scratches along a shelf edge. Traces of animals, perhaps rats, moving through the archive long before you arrived. Life, you realize, always leaves a mark, whether human or otherwise. You sit for a while on a stone slab, letting the silence of the archive settle around you. The weight of all those stories presses gently on your shoulders. It's quiet, yet it hums with the energy of countless lives, of scribes and priests, of merchants and children, of gods both worshipped and forgotten. Each tablet is a whisper, a bridge from the past into your hands. As you rise to leave, you glance once more at the shelves, at the fragments and the whole, at the mundane and the sacred intertwined. The archive may be cracked, dusty, and half forgotten, but it is alive in the echoes of those wedge marks. And you realize something profound. Even when empires collapse, even when cities crumble, these silent scribes have ensured that memory persists, patiently waiting for someone to listen. The sun has begun its slow descent, casting long amber shadows across the cracked streets, and you find yourself holding a freshly baked tablet in your hands. Its surface is smooth, warm, and slightly dusty, a perfect rectangle that feels heavier than you expect. You imagine the life of this tablet, not yet finished, waiting to take its place among thousands of others in a library, a temple, or perhaps even a merchant's home. Every line pressed into its clay is a seed, a promise that someone, somewhere, will read it, or at least preserve it for the future. You picture the scribe who made it, fingers steady and patient, stylus in hand. Perhaps it's an apprentice learning the discipline of writing, or a master meticulously copying a story, an administrative record, or a prayer. You trace the wedges gently, aware of the care embedded in every mark. Each indentation was made deliberately, a conscious act of preservation. And that's when you realize the tablet doesn't belong to you, it belongs to time. Once it leaves the scribe's hands, the tablet's journey begins. You imagine it being placed in a basket with others, each carefully stacked and labeled. Perhaps it travels through narrow streets, carried by a servant to a temple, or loaded onto a donkey, then onto a riverboat for a long journey down the Tigris or Euphrates. You can almost hear the creak of oars against the water, the soft braying of animals, the murmur of traders bargaining for goods. Somewhere along the way, someone might drop it, and it will chip or crack. Yet even damaged, it continues, resilient, waiting to tell its story. You pause to consider how different this is from writing on paper or digital text today. One accidental spill, one fire, and everything could be lost. But a clay tablet, especially one fired in a kiln, can survive floods, fires, and centuries of neglect. It's remarkable to think that this unassuming rectangle of mud could outlast empires, kings, and even the scribes who made it. Historians still argue whether scribes intended these tablets to endure for millennia, or if durability was an accidental byproduct of their material and methods. Either way, the results speak for themselves. As you follow the imagined journey, you see the tablet reaching its destination. Perhaps it rests in a library's carefully stacked shelves, or a temple's inner sanctum, or a merchant's storeroom. You envision a priest retrieving it for a reading aloud, or a scribe consulting it for a legal dispute. In every scenario, the tablet fulfills its purpose: communication, record-keeping, storytelling. Time passes. Generations change. The city that once bustled around the tablet falls silent. The ziggurats crumble, walls collapse, and sand drifts through empty streets. For centuries, the tablet lies buried, hidden beneath layers of dust, soil, and debris. Yet it survives, silent and patient, waiting for someone curious enough to uncover it. You wonder what it witnessed during all those years. The rise and fall of kings, wars, festivals, market days, children learning their letters. Then comes the archaeologist, brush in hand, gently lifting the tablet from its hiding place. You picture the meticulous care, the soft tapping to free it from the earth, the careful transport to a lab. Someone cleans it, studies it, records it, marvels at its survival. And finally, here you are, holding it in your hands. The tablet has now traveled across millennia, unseen, unheard, untouched, and yet it has preserved a fragment of life, a whisper from the past. You think of all the others, lost tablets, broken fragments, yet somehow so many more survived, waiting patiently to tell their stories. Even if their civilizations have vanished, the clay carries memory. It carries human presence. You imagine children in the distant future, long after our own time is forgotten, picking up these tablets. They trace the wedges, read the lines, and in doing so encounter the same human concerns, the same mundane joys, the same jokes, prayers, and mistakes that ancient scribes pressed into the clay. Humor and sorrow, devotion and bureaucracy. Time cannot erase these things once they are pressed into mud. A sudden breeze lifts sand into the air, and you let the tablet rest in your hands for a moment longer. It's heavy with meaning, weighty with centuries, yet it feels alive. You realize that the journey of a tablet is not just a journey through space, but a journey through human experience. Each scratch, each mark, each smudge is a story embedded in time, waiting to reach someone willing to listen. You set it down gently, imagining the countless tablets that never made it this far, crushed in collapsing walls, dissolved by rain, lost to the whims of history. Yet even they served their purpose in shaping a culture, recording a moment, training a scribe. Survival is not only about the individual tablet, but about the cumulative memory preserved in clay across an entire civilization. As you rise and glance back at the imagined archives, the idea strikes you. These small, simple rectangles of clay have done what walls, kings, and temples could not. They have outlasted empires. They have outlasted war and fire and forgetfulness itself. And in their silent endurance, they continue to speak, not only of gods and kings, but of the people who pressed their fingers into the soft clay, hoping to be remembered. You take a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the day and the weight of history together, and realize that every tablet is a bridge from the hands of a scribe long gone, through the centuries, to you. A reminder that even in the quietest corners of civilization, life persists, memory endures, and stories, once written, refuse to die. The sun has dipped lower now, softening the horizon into muted oranges and purples, and you find yourself wandering through the skeletal remains of a city long forgotten. Crumbled walls and scattered stones hint at streets once bustling with life. You step carefully among the ruins, kicking gently at loose earth until a fragment of baked clay catches your eye. Dusting it off, you reveal the familiar wedge-shaped impressions, a message from centuries ago, preserved against all odds. You imagine the city at its height, merchants shouting their wares, children chasing each other across sun-warmed courtyards, priests moving in measured processions to temple altars. Somewhere, scribes bent over shallow clay basins, pressing wedges into soft tablets, capturing everything from taxes and grain counts to hymns and love letters. Historians still argue whether some of these records were primarily practical or ceremonial, but the truth is often both. Clay served as a medium for both the mundane and the divine, the fleeting and the eternal. You kneel, brushing your fingers over another fragment. It bears the faint remains of a market ledger, a list of traded goods, quantities, and names. You smile faintly, imagining a merchant arguing over whether he received 6 jars of oil or 7, and a scribe patiently recording the final tally, knowing that this simple act would endure far beyond their lives. You recall how even minor scribbles, mistakes, and corrections in clay offer glimpses of daily life, the human quirks preserved as clearly as the words themselves. As you continue walking, you notice the faint outline of a ziggurat rising against the sky, half swallowed by the passage of time. It must have dominated the city, a monument not only to the gods, but to human ambition and ingenuity. And yet, it is the clay tablets, small, portable, and humble, that have truly survived. Entire libraries of stone and brick may have crumbled, but these unassuming mud slabs have carried history forward. You consider how irony plays out in history. The grand structures fall, and the ordinary things endure. You step into what must have been a temple courtyard, scattered with broken pottery and fragments of tablets. Some are practice tablets, evidence of young scribes learning their craft. Others are letters, hymns, legal contracts, and stories. One tablet contains a fragment of the Epic of Gilgamesh, while another records a prayer to Inanna for protection during flood season. You notice the faint impressions of fingerprints along the edges, tiny traces of people who handled these objects long ago, preserving life in small, tactile details. A gentle wind stirs, lifting dust and carrying faint whispers of the past. You imagine archaeologists centuries later discovering these same fragments, brushing away layers of sand to reveal words pressed into clay millennia earlier. There is something profoundly comforting in this thought. Even as civilizations collapse, fragments survive, patiently waiting for someone to listen. Some tablets are broken, their edges jagged, lines missing. You hold one carefully and notice that despite its damage, the story it contains remains legible. Scholars still debate whether entire myths or administrative records were lost, but you realize that even fragments can transmit meaning, emotion, and human experience across time. Each wedge is a testament to endurance, to the careful hand of a scribe who wanted to be remembered. You wander further, stepping over the skeleton of a wall and into a small chamber where dozens of tablets lie scattered on the floor. Each one is a tiny archive, a repository of memory. Some record the sale of livestock, others a grain distribution, while a few contain prayers and songs, poems to the gods, or laments over lost lives. Every tablet is a voice, a pulse of life that refuses to be silenced, even as the city around it has turned to dust. You pick up a fragment inscribed with a list of offerings to a temple. It reads like a shopping list of devotion. Oil, grain, honey, even a pair of sandals for the goddess. You chuckle at the practicality of it. Some things never change. Humans have always worried about pleasing those in power, divine or otherwise, and the record-keeping follows naturally. The sun sinks lower, and shadows stretch across the ruins, emphasizing the contrast between the fallen city and the enduring clay. You pause, running your fingers over another tablet, imagining the hands that pressed each wedge into the soft mud. You realize that every mark carries the weight of intention, of memory, of hope. Even when cities vanish and kings are forgotten, these small objects preserve human presence. Finally, you step outside, letting the evening air wash over you. Somewhere beneath the soil, countless tablets remain, still buried, still patient. Some may be discovered in a decade, others in 1,000 years. Their words, etched in mud and fire, will survive long after the streets have faded to dust. And you, for a brief moment, have held that endurance in your hands, connected across millennia to voices that refuse to be forgotten. The sun has dipped low, spilling a warm, mellow light across the museum hall where you now find yourself. A long table stretching out before you, covered in carefully arranged clay tablets. The air smells faintly of polished wood and dust, a scent both clean and ancient, as if the past itself has been gently bottled for preservation. You step closer, fingers hovering above the tablets, marveling at the journey each one has made, from the sticky banks of the Euphrates or Tigris to this quiet, climate-controlled room. A curator in soft gloves gestures toward a tablet and explains, "This one is from dated around 2500 BCE. You trace the wedge-shaped impressions, and it feels almost surreal to think that you're touching marks made nearly 4,500 years ago. The clay is cool beneath your fingertips, yet somehow alive with the energy of hands long vanished." Modern archaeology has given these tablets a second life. You imagine the careful excavation, brushes coaxing centuries of dust and sand from their surfaces. Meticulous notes taken, every fragment cataloged. Some tablets were found in whole libraries, others in scattered shards. Yet all have contributed to the remarkable picture of life in Mesopotamia. Historians still argue about the exact circumstances under which some libraries were buried or burned. But regardless of intent, the result has been survival. You pick up a small, unassuming tablet, its wedge marks neat, almost delicate. The curator explains that it's a simple receipt for barley, mundane yet invaluable. You can almost hear the clerk of the time tallying goods, murmuring numbers to himself as the stylus presses against soft clay. There is humor even in the small things: a tiny correction in the margin, a smudge from an impatient hand, a wedge slightly askew. The tablet preserves not just data, but life. Nearby, you notice a fragment of a much larger tablet, the Epic of Gilgamesh, or at least a portion of it. You lean closer, reading faintly the names of gods and kings, battles and journeys, laments and wisdom. The scribe's hand seems present, each wedge deliberate, each line a rhythm meant to be spoken, remembered, and felt. It is a whisper from the distant past, yet you can hear it clearly in this quiet room. Modern conservation techniques are fascinating. Tablets that were once baked by accident in fires are now stabilized with gentle methods, their cracks carefully treated to prevent further loss. Digitization has given them an entirely new existence. High-resolution images and 3D models allow people across the globe to study, touch virtually, and appreciate these artifacts without risking damage. The same stories that once required careful delivery by messengers or priests can now travel instantly through light and electricity. You pick up a small practice tablet, etched with repetitive syllables. Historians argue whether these were exercises or charms, but to you, it feels like the first heartbeat of a writer discovering his voice. The imperfections in the marks, the slightly uneven spacing, the casual swirl of a wedge here and there, they remind you that human experience is present in every line, that clay doesn't just carry words, it carries people. A digital display nearby projects an image of a tablet that was never fully excavated, showing fragments still embedded in earth. You imagine the archaeologist's hands, brushes in motion, lifting these pieces gently from soil hardened by time. There's patience in every motion, care in every glance. Some fragments are reconstructed with invisible joins, others left in situ, honoring the tablet's long journey. You realize that modern hands, like the ancient ones, preserve memory, bridging past and present. You notice a small sign reminding visitors not to touch the artifacts. You smile quietly. The scribe from thousands of years ago would probably approve, although perhaps he would have a cheeky note in the margin: handle gently or face the wrath of Enki. You can imagine historians still arguing whether such admonitions were serious or humorous, but the charm remains, bridging millennia with a wink. You step back and look at the collection as a whole. Here are administrative records, letters, receipts, hymns, epics, and practice exercises. You realize that every tablet, no matter how trivial it seems, has survived with intention, whether accidental or deliberate. Each one offers insight into human thought, labor, faith, and playfulness. And now, in this quiet museum hall, they are not only preserved, they are honored. You pick up a tablet with a hymn to Inanna, her name carefully pressed in wedges that shimmer faintly under the soft light. You imagine priests whispering these lines in torchlit temples, hoping their words reach the goddess. And now, thousands of years later, you are whispering them silently in your mind, connected by something invisible but palpable, the persistence of human intention through clay. As the sun outside fades into twilight, you place the tablet gently back on the table, feeling its weight linger in your mind. The journey from riverbank to ruin, from kiln to archive, from excavation to exhibition is complete for now. And yet, the story continues, as all good stories do, traveling through the hands of the curious, the careful, the reverent. You realize that modern hands on ancient clay are not so different from ancient hands themselves. Both seek to preserve, to communicate, to leave a trace that will outlast the fleeting present. And as you leave the museum hall, the quiet echo of wedge marks seems to follow you, a reminder that even in a rapidly changing world, something as simple as clay and care can endure. Twilight settles softly over your surroundings, a gentle hush that makes every sound seem sharper and more precious. You hold a small tablet in your hands, its edges worn and smoothed over centuries, and feel the weight of history resting lightly in your palms. You trace the wedge marks with your fingertips, marveling at the deliberate patience embedded in each impression. The scribe who pressed these symbols into soft clay likely never imagined you would one day hold them. And yet, here you are, connected across millennia by this fragile yet enduring medium. You pause to consider what clay has truly accomplished. Entire cities have risen and fallen. Kingdoms have expanded and vanished. Kings and priests have passed into dust. But these humble tablets persist, quiet and steadfast. It is almost miraculous. The ordinary, earthy substance of mud baked into permanence has preserved not only practical records, but stories, prayers, letters, and the minutiae of daily life. Historians still argue whether the longevity of clay was fully understood by Mesopotamian scribes or merely an incidental benefit of their techniques. Whatever the case, clay became a vessel for memory, a silent custodian of time. The tablet in your hands might have been a simple record, a ledger, a receipt, a letter to a distant relative. Or perhaps it contained a hymn, a story, or even a small joke meant to make someone smile. It doesn't matter. Each wedge pressed into the clay represents intent, a human moment captured for eternity. You can almost hear the scribe muttering softly as he works, counting grains, correcting a wedge, nudging clay into place. There is humor here too, one tiny mistake or flourish preserved forever, a reminder that life, even in its most meticulous details, contains imperfection and playfulness. You glance around the imagined archives, libraries, and dusty ruins where so many tablets have rested over centuries. Some were buried intentionally, hidden to protect them from fire or invasion. Others survived by sheer accident. They waited patiently, enduring floods, flames, neglect, and the slow erosion of time. And now, after thousands of years, you can hold them, read them, and feel the presence of those who pressed their stories into mud long ago. It is as if clay itself has become a medium of immortality, a quiet whisper that defies forgetfulness. As you reflect on this, you think about the journey of these tablets through the hands of modern scholars and archaeologists. Gentle brushes reveal hidden marks, careful notes preserve their context, and high-resolution images make them accessible to people around the world. Digital copies can travel across continents in an instant, yet there is still something profound about holding the original clay in your hand. You feel the temperature of the kiln, the texture of the riverbank mud, the pressure of the stylus, all transmitted across millennia. You imagine the countless lives recorded on these tablets, scribes learning their craft, merchants tallying trade, priests whispering hymns, children practicing their letters. Every line, every mark, every imperfection is a testament to the human desire to be remembered. And in that, there is a comforting constancy. Humans have always sought continuity, connection, and memory. Clay, stubborn and patient, answers that call. The day grows dimmer, and your surroundings blur softly into shadow. You feel the slow rhythm of history, the ebb and flow of civilizations, the persistence of stories that refuse to vanish. And in this quiet moment, you realize that the tablets are more than objects. They are bridges, bridges across time, culture, and mortality. They are proof that even when empires crumble, even when streets lie silent, memory endures when carefully preserved, when intentionally shared, when patiently pressed into a medium as humble as clay. You let your gaze wander over the tablets, now stacked in neat rows or scattered across ruins, each one a small miracle. Even fragments survive, whispers of lives and stories that once filled entire shelves. You think about the patience required to preserve memory in this way, the patience of the scribe, the care of the archivist, the reverence of those who excavate and study. You feel a quiet kinship with all of them, as if you too are part of the chain of preservation, carrying forward a fragment of humanity. The night deepens, and the edges of your vision soften. You set the tablet down gently, feeling the echo of its story lingering in your mind. Outside, the wind rustles faintly through imagined streets and courtyards, carrying with it the distant whispers of ancient voices. You inhale slowly, letting the calm of this continuity sink in. It is a reassurance. Time does not erase what is carefully preserved. Clay, memory, and human intention together form a bridge strong enough to outlast empires, outlast kings, and even outlast the silence of centuries. And as your eyes begin to close, you feel the gentle rhythm of history lull you, a quiet, patient cadence of lives lived, words pressed, and stories preserved. Clay, it seems, is more than mud. It is memory, endurance, and hope pressed into shape. And now, in your own quiet moment, you become part of its endless journey. Slowly, softly, the day turns fully to night, and you let the stories rest alongside you, their echoes blending with the hum of your own breathing. The ancient scribes, their cities, their daily lives, and their tiny human quirks all linger here, reassuring, calm, and patient, reminding you that while empires fall, memory, and the clay that holds it, endures. Now, as you let yourself sink deeper into comfort, imagine the soft weight of time folding around you. Each clay tablet, each careful wedge pressed into mud, rests quietly beneath the earth, waiting patiently. The scribes who created them are long gone, yet their hands, their laughter, their diligence, and even their small errors remain, whispering gently through the millennia. You can feel that persistence, a comforting tether connecting you to a distant world. The wind hums softly outside your window, blending with the faint echo of imagined footsteps in temple courtyards and market streets. Picture a scribe kneeling, stylus in hand, pausing to breathe as the clay absorbs his story. You are part of this continuum now, a witness to patience, human care, and the endurance of memory. Let the soft rhythm of these reflections carry your thoughts into a calm, slow pace. There is no rush here. No empire demands attention, no king commands you. Only the gentle persistence of stories pressed into clay, carrying lives and thoughts forward across time. Feel the quiet reassurance. Even when the world changes, even when civilizations fall, what is carefully preserved endures. Breathe slowly. Let the imagined rustle of ancient streets fade into soft darkness. Let the weight of centuries rest alongside you. And in this calm, remember that memory itself is patient, enduring, and profoundly kind. End of script. Sweet dreams.